Hi folks, today's video is the third part of my September wrap-up, and as I said in the previous one, I've chopped this up into smaller pieces, and I'm going to, I think, try to do this on a regular basis, do weekly mini wrap-ups, just because I've been reading a lot recently and it's a little bit more digestible for you guys, and from my perspective it means that I can kind of download my thoughts shortly after I've finished a book, because with the number of books I'm reading, sometimes by the time I get to the end of the month I'm thinking, I can't quite remember the main character's name in this first book or something. You know, I can remember more vague things, but I think reviews are the kind of place where it's worth having a bit more detail, and I'm able to provide more of that, you know, in a shorter period of time from when I've finished the book. So without further ado, the next book that I read in September was Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller, and I've really enjoyed Claire Fuller's work in the past, and this was no exception. It's got a very summery, hot, almost claustrophobic feel to it, which is quite wonderful. It's about this woman, well, it's written from her perspective, and she's looking back on her life, and we know from quite early on that she's dying and that she is in some kind of institution. She's, you know, in a rest home. She's got people caring for her, and she's looking back on this summer, and how old exactly she is isn't very clear. She's not a reliable narrator, which I love. But yeah, she's looking back at this, I think it's the very hot summer of 1969, and she's staying at this old mansion where she has been, she's been paid to go and catalogue different parts of this mansion. She's a specialist in gardens in particular, and sort of garden arrangements, and there's a bridge that she is particularly interested in looking at and documenting. Anyway, she meets this very strange couple, and it seems as though odd things are happening around this house, and it's kind of got that feeling of, is it haunted? What's going on? Is this main character, the protagonist, the point of view character, reliable? Is she telling the truth? Does she know what the truth is? Because in the present day, when she's looking back, she seems to be, she's not quite with it. She seems to be losing parts of her memory. She can't remember who the people are who are visiting her, and it's got a very blurry feel to it, where one person blends into the next. And so yes, this couple seem to have a very strange relationship, and she's a very strange woman, and she gets quite obsessed with them, and some strange happenings are going on. And that's probably about as much as I can say. It would be interesting to compare that to the blurb, because that was quite vague, but I think that the unreliability of the narrator is one of the most interesting parts of it. And yet her memories and how they're blurring and blending. And Claire Fuller has done an amazing job of writing that. Her writing is beautiful anyway. You know, the way that she's remembering different things is just very enjoyable to read. Her prose is excellent. And yeah, I would recommend this if you like unreliable narrators and yeah, sort of books set in very hot summers, because that seems to be a thing, and it's something that I quite enjoy reading, books that are in that really hot kind of oppressive heat, and that almost gives it a character of its own. Hot Milk by Deborah Levy is another one like that, and parts of Brideshead Revisited are a bit like that too, so I'm a fan. And this next book actually has a very similar atmosphere, because it is set in Morocco, in Tangier, and this time around we've got two main characters, two point of view characters, neither of whom seem to be reliable, or at least if one of them is, we can't tell because the other one is so unreliable. So we get different accounts of the same events, and it's up to the reader to figure out what's true and what's not, which is a lot of fun. And so it's about this, one of the women turns up in Morocco on the doorstep of her former friend from college, and they were roommates and were very close, and she's gone off and got married and now lives in Tangier. And so this other woman has tracked her down and has surprised her friend by turning up on their doorstep. And we gradually come to know that there was some kind of incident where they had a falling out and went their separate ways. So the book reflects on this incident back when they were at university from both perspectives. And yeah, it's a very patchy history because you don't know what's true and what's not. And sometimes they seem to be agreeing on things and you think, okay, yep, this is what's going on or what went on. And then sometimes they're completely at odds, and one character has a suspicion about another, and then the other seems to have a completely different viewpoint on it. It's a fascinating book, and it's been compared to The Secret History, which is why I picked it up. It's also been compared to Patricia Highsmith, and I think it has got a very sort of talented Mr. Ripley feel to it. Echoes of Carol as well, and the relationship there. So yeah, it again has that very claustrophobic feel to it. There's a con man in there who kind of appears at the beginning. And yeah, I would really recommend this. It's not that much like The Secret History. It's got a very different atmosphere to it, but when she's looking back at her time, they both went to this college, university in Vermont, which is a very similar setting to the university in The Secret History, and their reflections on it has more of a similar tone to The Secret History. But I wouldn't go into this thinking it's going to be the next Secret History, because it does have a very different feel to it, but in a really good way. I really like this. I think I gave it 4 stars. Yes, I did. And yeah, I didn't say what it was called, did I? It's called Tangerine by Christine Mangan. Yeah, would really recommend that. And then, oh yes, the other book that I read was Black Chalk by, who is it by? Christopher J. Yates. And this book is set at Oxford. So as you can probably see, I wanted to read books that are set at universities and books that have been compared to The Secret History, because this one has 2. And again, I can see why, but very different feel to it. And I think whenever you go into a book thinking that it's going to be, or knowing that it's been compared to one of your favourite books, you have to be a little bit careful and be looking at it in a broader sense, because there are so many ways in which a book can be similar to another. So the sense that this is about some very overprivileged kids at a university, Oxford in this case, it does compare it does make it comparable to The Secret History, and we know from the beginning that there's one that there was some kind of tragedy that occurred, but apart from that, it's not very similar to The Secret History. So we start out with one of the characters, an unnamed character, who is living this hermit-like life, and at the beginning we don't know where he's living, why he's there, anything like that, but he starts writing a diary, recollections of his time at university and the events that led to him living this very isolated life. And one of the first things he does in the book is he ventures outside for the first time in a long time. So it has this feeling of being outside of time, and you know, you've only got this one character who is inside his own thoughts, and another unreliable narrator, because you're kind of thinking, how how sane is he, how connected to these events is he, and is he recalling them properly? So that gives it this tension and lends a lot of questions to the reader. And I think that the setup of the whole book was excellent, but maybe the way that it all came together was not so much. So the story proper, outside of this framing device of the character who's looking back, is about a group of students who take part in a game. And it's basically a game of dares where they've got to do various different consequences, is what they call them. And it's to do with public humiliation, and that's basically it. They're not supposed to put each other in danger by doing it, but yeah, it's more psychological. So it takes a really long time for us to actually get to any of these consequences, and not much time seems to be spent on any of them. So it's more about the game as a whole and the psychology of the characters from this one character's point of view than about the game itself. And I think that slowed down the plot quite a bit. So I was listening to this as an audiobook, and I listened to it, I think, over 2 days. But even so, it did feel a little bit slow at times for the content. And yeah, I think that's partly because it didn't focus on these events. And yeah, I'm not sure if the payoff of the book as a whole really worked, but I thought that the journey there, aside from being a bit slow at times, was very good. So I think I ended up giving this 3 stars. I was going through it thinking, yeah, this is a 4-star book, and then the way that I just felt like it kind of collapsed a little bit at the end. So I downgraded it to 3. But yeah, if you like university novels, I would recommend this. Just it wasn't as good as Tangerine, for instance, and certainly It's No Secret History. But speaking of great books, I decided to go back and reread a series of books, and 2 of which I'll mention here, because I read these last month and enjoyed them so much that I couldn't stop thinking about them. So I decided to go back and read them again. So I've got myself physical copies of these now. It's the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater, and yeah, these have that selection of rich boys in the same way that Black Chalk does or The Secret History does, which is something that it's a bit of a guilty pleasure. I like reading about kind of overprivileged, usually white kids, which I realise has its own set of problems to it. But I think this is a bit more self-aware of the privilege of these characters, and it deals with it in a more interesting way. And when I reviewed these last time, I said that I had a bit of an issue with the main character, or one of the main characters, Blue, who was feeling a bit like a manic pixie dream girl. And I think this time around, sorry, there's sheep over there. If you can hear barking, that's what it is. I've got the door open, so there are sheep. But yeah, I felt as though she was actually more developed than I remembered, even from a month ago. And I still would have liked to have seen her developed a little bit more. But yeah, it didn't feel that way as much as it did the first time around. Anyway, so I reread The Raven Boys and The Dream Thieves. And I gave these both 4 stars to begin with, and I've actually upgraded both of them to 5 because, like I said, I couldn't stop thinking about them, and they were just as good, if not better, the second time around. So these are kind of urban fantasy, and you've got a character called Gansey who is searching for this sleeping Welsh king who is supposedly buried somewhere along this ley line of supernatural activity that runs through the town of Henrietta, which is in the States. And you've got Blue, who has been told by every psychic she has ever met that she will kill her true love if she kisses him. And then there are Ganzi's friends, Adam and Ronan, and they've all got very interesting lives that get explored throughout the series. And yes, Blue's parents, Blue's mother is a psychic, and she lives with an eclectic group of psychics. So yeah, it's got a very strange cast of characters, and I love the unlikeliness of the camaraderie that they have. And yeah, the dynamic between the characters is fantastic. And what I love the most about these books is the atmosphere, and that is largely brought about through her prose. The way she writes is fantastic. It's probably the best writing that I've come across in young adult fiction since his Dark Materials. So that's got to be good. So if you are somebody who doesn't read YA and maybe wants to give it a go, I would really recommend these. I will definitely reread them again at some point. And yeah, I can't get them out of my head. And I'm just reading the other two at the moment, but seeing as it's October, I'd better mention them in my October wrap-up, or the first part, which will hopefully be in a week's time. That's the plan. So I would love to know, what are your thoughts on university novels, and do you have any recommendations for books set at universities? I did a video a few years ago about campus novels, books set at universities, because they're one of my favourite things to read. And yeah, these are two that I hadn't read before. So I'd love to know if you have any recommendations for books set at universities or schools, actually, because yeah, The Raven Boys is about a group of high school kids, but it's got that kind of university-like feel to it because of the level of autonomy these characters have. And you know, they don't seem to be weighed down by their school responsibilities so much as it allows the plot to do its own thing in the way that you usually see more in university novels. Anyway, that's it from me for now. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!